Welcome back to another edition of History in Your Own Backyard. I'm Susie Selleck, and today we are in St. Paul, Indiana, and we are talking with Gladys Pike, who is going to tell us all about this beautiful little town. Gladys, thanks for hanging out today.
Thank you for coming.
So tell me, how did St. Paul get established?
There's a man named Jonathan Paul came here right after the state began in 1816, and he was looking for a place to build a grist mill. And he was from Holland, and he brought his family here. And in 1820, he got a tract of land right along Flat Rock, and he had his first grist mill. It was a hand-powered grist mill. And then fast forward, his son, in 1835, John Paul, took over his father's holdings and started building the overshot wheel mills, a grist mill, a woolen mill, and a lumber mill. Well, in 1853, the railroad came through,
Right.
and he decided to change the name from Paultown to St. Paul, and so began the town. And along with that came the finding of quarry stone. It was limestone, and so from 1850 until today, we still have a lime quarry. And that's how the town started.
Can you talk to me a little bit about those?
Well, we're standing in the museum, but this is in the Red Men's Hall. It started out actually as a Model T dealership. And the Red Men's heard that George Canals was going to build a dealership, and they said, we don't have a lodge hall. And so they talked to him. They said, we'll build the foundation, you build the first floor, and we'll build the top floor. And so it began. And we have two big double doors at the front of the building, shows where they came in with their Model Ts. And pretty soon the Red Men's kind of took it over. And down here there has been grocery stores, meat markets, restaurants. Everybody remembers something different in this building until the museum is here now.
Now, and I heard something earlier, arson, Big John, what's that all about?
Gosh. Well, this has been well documented. In 1911, as the train slowed, it was the summer, a big black dog jumped out of one of the freight cars. And he pretty soon was everybody's dog in town. Everybody loved him. Now we're going to go forward. The tax men came in and people took up a collection to buy him a tag. In those days you had to have a tag. And he ran loose. Well, right before Christmas in 1912, a fire started, and it burnt the elevator down. And about 2 weeks later, the depot burned. Well, people knew then these were suspicious fires. And in January, another building burnt, and now they knew they had an arsonist. So they brought in detectives to try to figure this out. Couldn't find out what happened. Then 2 stores burnt in one night. This was all night. And 2 stores burnt. And of course, there was no fire equipment, so they had to do everything with just pumps and buckets. 2 stores, and now those stores had the post office in it, and it was just tragic. People were panicked now. There had been 5 fires in a matter of just weeks. And then it happened. The Kelsos, their house was on fire. And Big John was there immediately, scratching and barking, and got the people out. That was in May. Now we've gone from Christmas time to May. And then another fire. Dr. Bell's house was on fire. Immediately, Big John was there digging and scratching and barking, and they got out, but Mrs. Bell was burnt. But it didn't kill her, but she's badly burned. And they said, we got a hero. Big John's a hero. So they got him a collar and a big tag, and they put Big John, hero, and the date, and St. Paul, Indiana. And the fire stopped. No one ever knew who was doing this. But I think by her almost dying in the fire, they stopped it. And but we all know that Big John would have known, because he must have been walking with this arsonist and was able to get to those houses immediately.
As you and I were talking earlier, you took a liking to a special bridge, and when that went away,
Yes.
How did that make you feel? Why did it go away?
The Stone Arch Bridge. It was the biggest in the state. It was a 5-arch stone bridge built as Romans built their bridges, which, by the way, the Romans still have 1,000 years later. And this was built in 1907, and it should have never been torn down. When they tried to take it down, they couldn't get it down, so they had to dynamite it down. But it was a beautiful stone arch bridge. And like I said, it was from 1907 to 1965. And in this country, that's old.
Right.
We don't want to keep them. And the men that built it were from St. Paul, and the men that designed it was from St. Paul. The ECK was their name, their last name.
Gladys, there's a couple other older buildings here that I think are just fantastic from the outside. Can you talk about what they were, what they are?
Well, let's just start, and we'll be uptown on each side of the railroad. The railroad came right down the middle of town, kind of like a railroad alley in 1853. And the town boomed then. I mean, buildings were being built fast.
Right.
And one of the big buildings up there that I like is called the St. Paul House. And the way it worked, the train would come in, would stop at the depot. The salesman would get out. They called them drummers in those days because a lot of them carried a little drum that they kind of whacked on. And they would come down here. Next to this building was the livery stable, Alf Cherry's livery stable. And you rented a horse and buggy, kind of like Hertz Rent-A-Car.
Yeah.
And so then they would take off through the countryside with their sample cases and their catalogs, and they would go everywhere and sell. You could buy a complete house from Sears and Roebuck, right down to the last nail, the last hinge, whatever you needed, and you would get a book that shows you how to put this together. If you lost your book, you probably were in big trouble. But anyhow, they put this big book with it, and they just sold everything that way. They sold everything through these sample cases. It was a big deal after the railroad came through.
Very cool. Give me one other neat building in here. What it was?
I love the ticket office on the corner over here. It's the last wood building in town, and this was for the traction line. The traction line came through here in 1907 to 1932. I also love the theater. The movie theater was built in 1915, and it lasted into the Depression years.
Okay.
And they said when you would hear the big old dynamo engine, gas-powered engine crank up, because there was no electricity, you could hear it all over town. They knew the movie was ready to go.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there's been all kinds of businesses in there, and one that makes me have a giggle is the button factory.
A button factory.
A man came to town in 1944, and he talked to the different businessmen in town, and he said, I've got an idea. And you're going to have to watch this one. And he said, women make their own clothes. And they did in 1944.
Yeah, they did.
So their blouses and their dresses would have the buttons and eyes like you normally see. Well, he said, you put snaps on them, just snaps. And then your buttons will have snaps glued to the back of the button. So when you want a new look on your dress, you unsnap those buttons and put new buttons. And earrings went with it. You got those kind of earrings with a post. You cranked it in. You know, the ones that make your ears go numb?
Yeah.
And it had a snap on it. And you would put the same kind of a button on your earrings. So it was really clever. Well,
So the birth of style, really.
Right here in St. Paul. I mean, we're in St. Paul. And so he said, I want you to get some men together, and I want to come back and give a demonstration. So when he come back, he brought this really young, good-looking young woman, rather bosomy. And by the time she got done snapping and unsnapping, he had sold over 100 shares for $35 a share. And that's a lot of money in 1944.
Yeah.
So and then he decided he'd set the factory up. So he took the movie theater, and now he went into it big time. He brought in 6 picnic tables, and they all sit at the tables, putting these kits together to sell. And my sister-in-law, Ada Lou, was one of the button girls. She'd come, she's about 15, and she'd come and sit at the picnic table and put these together. It lasted a whole year. It just lasted a whole year's all, but it was a kind of a clever idea. Now, the next building I can think of, it's in bad shape right now, but it was a billiards hall, and it's still here. 1914, the Bush brothers built that.
Gladys, the connection between St. Paul and Wilberforce. Can you talk to us about that?
Wilberforce is a university in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I had posted a picture in the newspaper, just had Shorter Hall written on it. It was done about 1920, 24, somewhere in there. And I had put underneath that, wonder where this stone went. We had stone carvers here. This was a stone quarry town.
Yeah.
I mean, even our basketball players were called the Blasters. because of dynamite. I mean, they really were. The school was known as the Blaster School. Well, I kept asking people, where could Shorter Hall be? And somebody picked up on it and started looking on the internet, which I don't go too much in, but they did. And they found it was at Wilberforce University, Wilberforce, Ohio. And it was the first black university before the Civil War.
Wow.
And it's still there. I've talked to them since then. Shorter Hall was named after a man that started Wilberforce University. And Wilberforce University comes with a name. Wilberforce is a man in England that brought before the Parliament in England in the 1840s that there would be no slavery in England. So here all these things begin to tie together. The stone is still there. It's been taken down, and I kind of was trying to get them to bring it, if we could go get it, bring it here and put it in the museum, but they want to keep it as their stone too. They're going to fix it.
You were telling me earlier about the Goldfish farms here, the largest in Indiana?
Right. As
Okay.
you're going out, it's about 2 miles out of town is where it was at. And a lot of the people didn't know about it. I actually had to read a lot to find out about it. I read in a 1914 high school yearbook that a senior at that time wrote about this goldfish farm. And he had gone out there not knowing what he was going to find. It had started in 1880, and this fellow got some goldfish, European goldfish, from a Chicago dealer. And he started it, and it just went off. I mean, he was selling goldfish to all kinds of pet stores. Well, by 1914, when this young senior went out there to do this thesis or something on this, he found 100 ponds, some of them cemented. They were 60 feet long, 45 feet wide, and 3 feet deep. And he saw how they terraced and brought in fresh water, and they could clean it. And he was amazed at how it was set up. So he talked to them more, and they said they sent him out on the railroad or on the in 25-gallon tanks of water, 250 fish in a tank. And they had begun to stand to China and Japan for breeding fish, because that's where they were known for. They were known for their goldfish. And so they had sent there to get new breeding fish. I didn't even figure that we did that kind of thing.
Or needed to, yeah.
Yeah, how would we do that? But they did. And so they would send those clear from China and Japan to this country in 1914. Even before that, 1910, they were doing that. And so they were crossbreeding, and to get a special-looking American goldfish. It was called the American fantail. And when he found out there, there was all kinds. There was a fish called the Popeye. I have no idea why, but Popeye, a comet, and then several names that are hard to pronounce.
Right.
But they had all kinds. And they would drain that down to 6 inches. And men would wade in with little nets and catch these fish to put in these tanks to send. It's amazing.
Oh, it is
And
amazing.
people around here didn't even hardly know that. They'd say, oh, that's out on the fish pond road. Some guy and his fish. And it was the largest in the world.
Stone quarries, they're still here today, correct?
Yes.
How far do they go back?
Well, 1850 was when they first realized we had limestone, and they started burning to make lime, and they kept digging and found big amounts of heavy stone. And there's been a stone quarry here since 1850 to the day. We're still known as a quarry town. There at one time, about 10, they weren't all going at one time. There were 3 or 4 great big ones. And one of them is still working. And then there's one that's turned into a water park. It's called White Rock. And then there's one that is a place where people could come in and just do their camping and camp like that. And there's still one, and it's called Hidden Paradise. It's a camping park.
Give me a story about the canning factory.
All righty. Well, one time in 1941, we had a canning factory here that started in the 1920s. But in 1920 or 41, Stokely's come in to buy it. The war had started. World War II had started, and they came in to buy it to get the production really rolling. And as the war went on, we started having Italian prisoners of war, and they were at Camp Atterbury. And they would bring them up here to work in the canning factories in the summer because we had such a big production. And they seemed to be happy about it. They were like being out and working with the people here.
Right.
And So after the war was over, years after the war was over, some of them came back to Camp Atterbury. They had built some sort of a chapel there when they were there. And then they, I guess, went around to see where they had been at some of these canning factories years and years later.
Really?
Yeah, so they were treated well.
Obviously, yeah.
They were treated well.
Yeah, what a compliment to your town. Thank you for watching another edition of History in Your Own Backyard. I'm Susie Selleck. Today we were talking with Gladys Pike, who gave us a lot of information and great stories about St. Paul, Indiana. Remember, travel slowly and stop often. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.